The shrill ring of a phone shattered the midnight stillness. Ethan Cross jerked awake, his pulse hammering in his throat. The sound was unfamiliar, sharp, insistent. His own phone lay untouched on the nightstand, dark and silent. This foreign, vibrating thing, sat on the coffee table, screen glowing with an unknown number. He hesitated. No one should be calling him. No one even had a reason to. Still, his fingers found the device, pressing it to his ear with slow, wary precision. A voice, low and unhurried, coiled through the speaker. "Your time is borrowed. You have 24 hours. The line went dead. A slow chill unfurled in his chest. Ethan pulled the phone away, staring at its blank screen. The air around him felt heavier, as though something unseen had shifted. He checked the call history. Nothing. No record of an incoming call. His gaze flicked toward the door. Locked. The windows shut. The shadows stretching across his apartment remained undisturbed, yet the sensation of being watched crawled along his spine. His first thought was a prank. Some sick joke from someone who knew his past, someone who wanted to see him unravel. But then the screen lit up again, and this time it wasn't a call. It was a countdown. 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 48 seconds. The numbers flickered, each second dropping away with a quiet, merciless certainty. A slow exhale left his lips. He turned the device over in his hands, searching for anything, an engraving, a brand, a clue to its owner. The phone was smooth, weighty, expensive, not something left behind by accident. A low hum of unease settled in his chest. He didn't believe in coincidences. The weight of exhaustion still clung to him, but sleep was no longer an option. He rose from the couch, pulling on a hoodie, pushing away the thought that something unseen had already sunk its teeth into his reality. He stepped into the hallway. The silence felt different. He'd lived in this building long enough to recognize its rhythms. The distant murmur of late-night television, the creak of footsteps from the unit upstairs, the occasional slam of a car door from the street below. Tonight, though, the quiet had a presence, a thick, listening stillness. He shook it off and made his way down the stairwell. The city at night had always been a comfort, predictable in its chaos. The hum of passing traffic, the glow of neon against rain-slick pavement, the distant wail of sirens, all of it grounding, familiar. The diner on the corner was still open, its buzzing fluorescent lights spilling onto the sidewalk. He stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. The waitress barely glanced up as he slid into a booth. "Coffee." He nodded. She poured without question, steam curling from the cup like a phantom. Ethan wrapped his hands around the ceramic, letting the warmth seep into his skin. The phone sat on the table beside him, countdown ticking. 23 hours, 45 minutes, and 3 seconds. The numbers were impassive, detached. They didn't care what he did with the time left. A sharp clatter broke his focus. A man at the counter had knocked over his drink, muttering curses as coffee bled across the counter. The waitress moved to clean it up, her back to Ethan, her attention momentarily elsewhere. That's when he saw it. A man in the farthest booth, watching him. Not casually, not the way people glanced up in idle curiosity. No, this was different. Intentional. The man's posture was relaxed, almost too much so, like he wanted to seem unassuming. A half-empty cup of coffee sat untouched before him. His fingers tapped absently against the tabletop, but his gaze never wavered. Ethan met his stare. The man smiled. Something cold curled in Ethan's gut. He forced himself to stay still, to appear unfazed, but every instinct screamed at him to move. He flicked his gaze to the phone. 23 hours, 43 minutes, and 17 seconds. The numbers kept falling. When he looked up again, the man was gone. The door to the diner swung shut, the soft chime of the bell swallowed by the low murmur of the city outside. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he scanned the street, but the man was gone. The rain had started again, fine needles of water catching the glow of flickering neon signs. He took a cautious step forward, his mind racing. The phone's countdown had continued its relentless descent, ticking away seconds he could no longer afford to waste. He turned sharply, checking every corner, every moving shadow. The stranger hadn't just left. He had disappeared. A trap. Ethan's breath came slow and steady as he forced his hands into his pockets, masking his unease. There was a time when paranoia had been his closest ally, a survival mechanism honed through years of chasing dangerous truths. He had let it dull, but now it surged back, an old instinct stretching awake. He moved, slipping into the alley beside the diner, the scent of wet pavement and cigarette smoke heavy in the air. If someone was watching, they'd expect him to head home, to return to the safety of familiarity. He chose the opposite, a shortcut through the back streets, weaving through the skeletons of buildings long abandoned. He moved fast but without panic, his senses tuned to every echo, every shift in the dark. Then a sound. Footsteps. Not hurried, not reckless. Measured. Following. He picked up his pace, rounding a corner too sharply, nearly slipping on the damp concrete. The footsteps mirrored his every move. Not an accident. A flash of motion in his periphery. A silhouette at the alley's mouth, blocking his path back. He pivoted, sprinting toward the open street, but another figure emerged ahead, stepping into view with an ease that sent a cold certainty through him. They had been waiting. A deep breath steadied his pulse. No time for hesitation. He feigned left before cutting sharply right, dodging past the first figure, boots pounding against the pavement as he wove through the streets. A horn blared as he darted across an intersection, headlights slicing through the rain. Tires screeched, but he didn't stop, didn't look back. A narrow gap between two buildings. He lunged into it, pressing himself against the wall, chest heaving, listening. Silence. No footsteps. No voices. Still, he waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Only when he was certain did he pull the phone from his pocket, its screen glowing defiantly against the dark. The city pulsed with restless energy, its neon veins casting fractured reflections across the rain-slicked pavement. Ethan moved quickly, blending into the late-night crowd, his breath steady but his mind a storm. The phone in his pocket burned against his skin, its countdown an unrelenting whisper at the edge of his thoughts. Less than half a day left. The people around him were unaware of the invisible noose tightening around his throat. Strangers lost in their own lives, their own worries. If they knew, if they could see the weight pressing against his ribs, would they care? He doubted it. A sudden vibration in his pocket sent a jolt through him. He pulled out the phone, expecting another silent message, another cruel reminder of time slipping away. Instead, a location appeared on the screen. No sender, no instructions, just coordinates. His fingers tightened around the device. He didn't have a choice. He had to go. The address led him to a district long past its prime, where buildings leaned too close together, suffocating the narrow streets between them. Most of the windows were dark, their shattered remains jagged like broken teeth. A place forgotten by time. And yet, someone was here, watching. He felt them before he saw them. A presence in the periphery, a shadow moving when nothing should have moved. Ethan forced himself forward, his every step deliberate. If they wanted him afraid, they would have to try harder. The coordinates led him to a rusted door beneath a flickering street lamp. It creaked open before he could touch it. Inside, a dimly lit corridor stretched ahead, lined with old filing cabinets and stacks of paper that smelled of dust and neglect. A single desk sat at the end, a man behind it. Older, with silver at his temples and the kind of stillness that came from knowing exactly how much power he held. His eyes lifted as Ethan approached, unreadable. "You're late," the man said. Ethan didn't answer. The man gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Ethan remained standing. "I don't have time for games." The man smiled faintly, tapping a folder against the desk. "Then you should start listening." The phone in Ethan's grip vibrated again. He glanced at the screen. Time was slipping through his fingers. Conclusion. The man's expression didn't change, but Ethan could feel it. Something shifting, something inevitable. "Sit," the man repeated, quieter this time. And against every instinct screaming at him to run, Ethan did. Ethan sat, his muscles coiled, ready to spring at the first wrong move. The man across the desk remained still, fingers resting lightly on the folder before him. The air between them felt razor-thin, stretched taut with unspoken truths. "You have questions," the man said, his voice even. "I have answers, but they come at a cost." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. The countdown glowed on the screen. Less than an hour. He forced his voice to remain steady. "Who sent the phone?" The man studied him for a moment before sliding the folder forward. "You already know." Ethan hesitated before flipping it open. The first page was a grainy photograph, a younger version of himself, standing beside a woman whose face had been violently scratched out. His stomach turned to ice. "This is a mistake," he murmured. The man tilted his head. "Is it?" Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He had buried this part of his life, left it behind in the wreckage of a past he refused to revisit. But now, it was clawing its way back, demanding to be reckoned with. His eyes darted to the next page. A report. A list of names. Some familiar, some unknown. At the bottom, one line stood out in bold letters. Subject terminated. Case closed. His breath hitched. "What is this?" The man leaned forward slightly. "It's the truth. The only question is, what are you going to do with it?" The phone vibrated again, time slipping away, dragging him toward a moment he wasn't sure he was ready for. His mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to burn the folder and erase whatever past had been set in motion. But the clock was still ticking, and if he had learned one thing tonight, it was that running wouldn't stop it. He looked up, meeting the man's gaze. "Tell me everything." Conclusion. A slow smile played at the man's lips, as if he had been waiting for those words. "Good," he said, reaching for another file. "Then let's begin."